In the dying light of a drought-stricken prairie, a widowed rancher reins in his horse because something is lying in the dust. A barefoot woman, bruised, half-conscious, as if the land itself spat her out. He reaches for his rifle, then freezes when his little boy steps forward, eyes shining with tears. The child whispers a sentence that stops the rancher's heart cold. Mama finally came. But the woman doesn't know them, and by sunrise, the whole town will be at their door, demanding answers. The sky bled rust and ash as the sun sagged low, casting long shadows across the cracked earth. Dust curled off the dry grass like smoke from a dying fire. The wind had stopped hours ago, too hot to move, too mean to care. Before we uncover why a boy's quiet plea stopped a trigger from being pulled, what secret the silver locket was hiding in plain sight, and how the first drop of rain rewrote an entire family's fate, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just tales by the fire, they're echoes of resilience, mercy, and the battles fought in silence. Your support keeps these stories alive and lets us bring more forgotten voices out of the dust. One click carries us further down this trail. Thank you for riding with us. Every creature with breath left had gone silent. It was the kind of evening that pressed against the skin like a warning. Wyatt Marlowe, the widowed rancher of Red Hollow, rode the north fence alone, saddle leather creaking with each cautious step of his horse. His eyes scanned the wire line for breaches, for signs of coyotes or desperate men. He wore that look again, hard as barbed wire, soft only in the eyes if you knew what to look for. But no one did, not anymore. Not since the fever took his wife 3 years back, or so the doctor had called it. Wyatt had never bought that story, not really. Too many unanswered questions. Too few footprints leading away from the bed where she'd vanished. He was about to turn back when someone broke the rhythm of the dust and dead grass. She lay slumped near a weathered fence post, her dress torn, skin sunburnt and bruised. Her feet were bare, cracked and bloodied from miles of unkind land. A ribbon of dried blood curled down from her temple, caking in the corner of her jaw. She breathed shallow, as if each inhale was borrowed. A tremble passed through her shoulders, but her eyes stayed closed. Wyatt reined in hard. His horse balked, sensing what he could not. His hand went to the rifle slung across his back, but didn't raise it. Instead, he dismounted slow, boots crunching on grit. He studied her. There was no pack, no weapon, nothing but the silent, stubborn proof of suffering. He crouched, the dust rising in a silent prayer. He reached out but stopped, fingers hovering inches from her wrist. Touching someone like this meant something. In this land, mercy always cost. Behind him, a smaller pair of footsteps pattered closer. "Papa!" The voice was small, dry as wind-scoured bone. Wyatt didn't turn. "Go back to the house, Eli." But the boy stepped forward anyway, his wide eyes locked on the broken stranger at their feet. His straw-colored hair curled with sweat, and his voice, when it came again, was quiet. Final. "Mama finally came." Wyatt froze. The words hit like a nail driven deep. His breath caught, rattled in his chest. The boy stood firm, no trembling, no doubt, just a 6-year-old face holding something older than memory. Something carved from longing. The woman stirred then. A sound, small and ragged, escaped her lips. Her eyes flickered, fighting the weight of pain and Sunday. She didn't speak, but her gaze locked on the boy, as if she'd really heard him. And something in her expression cracked. Not recognition, not confusion either. Just the barest flicker of knowing. Wyatt's hand dropped away from the rifle. Silence fell again, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of everything about to change. And somewhere far off, thunder rolled. The sky wasn't bleeding yet, it was bracing. 36 hours earlier, it held the weight of something that hadn't broken, but would. Clouds stacked like bruises on the horizon, coiling into the kind of storm that didn't just pour, it judged. Wind ran low to the ground, combing the plains in nervous strokes, tugging at wire fences and door hinges like it wanted in. Inside the ranch house, Wyatt Marlowe moved through silence like a man used to ghosts. He boiled coffee over a wood stove that had outlived better times. The walls around him bore no photographs, just nails, bent and bare, like memories torn down and never replaced. A wooden box sat on the mantel, her wedding ring inside, her name etched shallow on the lid, Cora. He hadn't opened it in over a year, but he dusted it every Sunday. Always the same stroke, gentle, measured, unfinished. Outside, his son chased chickens with a stick and a laugh that didn't match the silence of the house. Wyatt watched from the window, unmoving. The boy had Cora's eyes, same fierce light behind them. Sometimes, when Eli asked too many questions about where Mama went, Wyatt would pretend he didn't hear. Sometimes, he really didn't. That morning, he'd mended fence posts until his hands blistered, saddled the same horse with the same rope, rode the same trail hoping anything would feel new. It never did. The land didn't offer comfort, just duty, and duty was what kept him upright. Meanwhile, 60 miles east, metal clanged against metal in the belly of a forgotten boxcar shunted off the main line. The train had stopped just long enough to be forgotten, its engine groaning on some distant track. The door hadn't been locked with a key, it had been bolted from the outside. A poor man's prison. Inside, the woman stirred from a crawl into a climb. Blood clung to her fingernails, torn from hours of trying. Her wrist bore a bruise in the shape of a man's grip. Her mouth was dry, lips cracked from more than thirst. She had no shoes. Just a cotton dress ripped up one side and a half-scorched name on her breath. "Wyatt," she whispered, like trying on a coat that might not fit. The lock gave under the weight of desperation and rust. The door screeched open with a sound that could wake the dead, but no one came. She tumbled out onto gravel and weeds, the heat hitting her like a slap. The land ahead stretched flat. No trees, no mercy, just the slow undulation of dying grass and the memory of where the sun used to rise softer. She ran for as long as she could, then walked, then dragged herself. The skin on her soles peeled back like paper, her feet left stains on rock. Every step forward erased the steps before. All she knew was the name, and a face she couldn't describe but would recognize if she saw it. A face that meant safety, or truth, or maybe just end. Back at the ranch, Wyatt walked the fence line alone, unaware that she was already walking toward him. Unaware that the storm was not just in the sky, it had already begun. The wind shifted that night, bringing with it a silence so complete it pressed against the windows like a held breath. The woman lay unconscious in the back of Wyatt's wagon, her legs curled in against her chest, as if sleep could protect her from whatever she'd run from. Her skin burned with fever, and each jolt of the wheels over the rutted dirt road drew a low sound from her throat, not quite pain, not quite words. Wyatt didn't speak. He hadn't since he'd lifted her off the dirt and seen the way her bones felt too close to the skin. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask what she'd done, because deep down he didn't want to know, not yet. Questions carried weight, and answers could snap the spine if you weren't ready. At the ranch house, Eli waited on the steps, bare feet kicking dust, eyes locked on the figure in the wagon like he'd been waiting all his short life for her to arrive. As Wyatt lifted the woman into the house, Eli followed without a word, carrying a wet cloth and the little tin box marked Mama's medicine. He hadn't opened it in years, not since Wyatt packed away everything that smelled like her. But the boy had known where it was, all the same. Wyatt laid the woman on the couch, pulled the curtains closed, and lit the oil lamp. Her face, in that flickering amber light, looked both younger and older than it should have. Too much life lived too fast. Dirt caked under her nails, and her lips twitched like she was arguing with someone in her dreams. He cleaned her feet first. The soles were shredded raw. Each touch made her flinch. Then he stitched the cut along her collarbone, slow and steady, hands moving with a practice he hadn't used since his wife was still there to scold him for being too rough. Still, he said nothing. Only when Eli returned, carrying a blanket and tucking it around her shoulders with both hands, did Wyatt speak. "You don't know who she is." Eli looked up, eyes wide and glassy. "I do." "You want to. That's not the same." "She knows me, Papa. She looked at me like Mama used to." Wyatt stood still, needle paused in midair. The words hit him like thunder expected, but still loud enough to shake something loose. He finished the last stitch, cut the thread with his teeth, and sat back. The woman hadn't stirred in minutes. Her breathing had gone shallow. She might have been dying. He didn't know. He didn't want to care. But there was something about the way her hand had brushed against Eli's earlier, just a twitch, and the way the boy hadn't flinched, hadn't backed away. "She ain't your mother," Wyatt said flatly. Eli didn't blink. "Then why did she come here?" That question hung in the room like smoke that wouldn't clear. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the eaves. The sky flashed once silent lightning far off. A storm was coming, but not the kind that washed things clean. The kind that scattered truths like fence posts in a flood. And Wyatt Marlowe, for the first time in years, didn't know if he'd made the right choice or just invited a second burial. By morning, the silence had turned brittle, the kind that snapped under boots and burned in the throat. Dust hung in the air like suspended ash, the sky a low bruise above the prairie. Inside the ranch house, the woman stirred for the first time in full consciousness. Her eyes opened wide, not with confusion, but with the sharp, cautious gaze of someone used to waking somewhere they shouldn't be. Wyatt stood at the stove, watching her from the corner of his eye while pretending to stir beans that weren't cooking. Eli sat on the floor, drawing circles in the dirt with a stick, humming the tune his mother used to sing when the nights got too long. The woman's eyes followed the boy. She winced when she tried to speak, the cut on her lip cracking anew. "I know him," she said hoarsely. Wyatt didn't turn. "That's so." He used to have a small scar on his chin. From falling off a hay bale, he cried for 3 hours. Eli looked up, touched his chin like he remembered the pain for the first time. "I never told her that," he whispered. Wyatt didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because outside, hooves thundered in the distance. Not one rider, not two, more than a handful, less than an army. Enough to carry torches without shame. Enough to believe they were right without proof. They came by the north ridge, dust clouds like storm fronts behind them. At their center was Sheriff Abram Delver, not elected, not official, but feared. A man with the law in one hand and a branding iron in the other. Men like him didn't need courts. They carried their judgments in the weight of their saddles and the tone of their voice. By the time they reached the ranch, the woman had vanished from the front room. Wyatt had hidden her behind the cellar door, beneath old feed sacks and flour tins, like smuggling guilt itself underground. Delver called out without dismounting. "We hear you're harboring a railway escapee, Wyatt. Some girl broke off a chain car outside Dunrock, left blood, footprints, and a broken lock. Fella she ran from says she's dangerous." Wyatt stepped onto the porch. His rifle leaned by the door, untouched. "I found a woman half dead on my land. That's not illegal. It is if she's a fugitive." "Got proof?" Delver smiled, slow and cruel. "Proof don't come after. It comes when enough men say it's true." Inside, the woman clutched Eli's hand in the darkness. She whispered something, and the boy nodded, as if he'd heard it before. Outside, the posse fanned out, circling the house like wolves, unsure if the meat was still warm. One of them spit in the dirt and muttered about cons with sweet faces. Wyatt stood firm. "Until someone shows me a warrant with her name on it, he said. "This here's still my house. Not your gallows." But even he knew fences were only good until enough men decided they weren't real. Inside, Eli looked up at the woman again. "You really remember me?" She nodded. "I remember your laugh. You had a high one, like a bird call." He swallowed hard. "I don't laugh like that anymore." She touched his cheek, gentle as dusk. "You might again." And Wyatt, standing on the porch with firelight dancing in the distance, asked himself the only question that mattered now. What do you trust more, what your eyes see, or what your heart won't let go? And which one's more likely to get you killed? The knock came just after midnight, 3 hard raps that echoed like shots in the dry dark. Wyatt hadn't lit the lantern yet, but he was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with his boots on, a shotgun resting across his lap. The house was quiet behind him. Eli curled up under quilts in the back room, the woman still hidden beneath the false floor of the pantry, breathing like someone afraid even breath would betray her. Wyatt rose, slow and silent, and lit the lantern with one practiced flick. Flame caught and flickered, throwing long shadows on the walls, stretching them tall and thin like ghosts trying to leave. He walked to the door and opened it without asking who stood on the other side. He already knew. Silas Cormac. Once his brother in blood and war, now a man in the sheriff's coat, only because no one else had the guts to wear it. He stood on the porch, face hard as sun-baked stone, a band of men behind him half silhouetted by the torches they carried. They hadn't come to talk, they'd come to end something. "I didn't bring a warrant," Silas said, voice low and clean. "Didn't think I'd need one between us." Wyatt didn't answer, just stepped aside and let the lantern light spill over both of them. "She's here," Silas continued. "We know it. Woman matching the fugitive's description seen limping toward this property. Witness on the train says she bit the man who locked her up. Drew blood, said she was crazy. That so?" Wyatt's voice was quiet, unreadable. Silas took a breath. "You hand her over now. I'll make sure the land stays in your name. That's the trade. Clean, no court, no mob, no burnings. Just you and me, and a door closed behind it." Wyatt studied his old friend, saw the way Silas couldn't quite meet his eye. This wasn't just about law, it was about power, order, control. The posse behind him didn't want justice. They wanted ritual. A public sacrifice to remind everyone that safety came from fear. "She's not what you think," Wyatt said. Silas tilted his head. "Then what is she?" Behind them, the pantry door creaked open. She stepped into the lamplight, barefoot, shaking, but upright. The bruises on her neck had begun to yellow. Her voice cracked but carried. "Don't do this," she said, not to Silas, but to Wyatt. "Don't protect me for my sake. I'm not worth your land, your name, your fight." Eli appeared behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes, voice small. "Don't let them take Mama." Wyatt's hand gripped the shotgun, knuckles whitening. He turned to the woman. His voice came out low, dangerous. "Are you lying to save yourself, or to save him?" She looked him dead in the eye. "I don't know, maybe both. But I'd rather burn than let them break that boy again." Outside, the torches flickered. Inside, something else burned hotter. What would you do? Hand her over and save your land? Or stand between her and the men with fire in their eyes, knowing full well what it would cost? Morning broke with no warmth. The sun hung low behind a veil of clouds, casting long, cold shadows across the ranch like a memory that refused to be buried. The posse had retreated sometime before dawn, leaving behind boot prints and the smoldering remains of an ultimatum. Wyatt hadn't spoken since. The woman slept in the corner of the main room, curled beneath a wool blanket that still carried Cora's scent. Eli paced the porch, not playing, not wandering, searching for something. Hours passed. The barn sat in quiet collapse on the western edge of the property. Its beams bowed and ribs exposed, half-eaten by time and weather. No one went in anymore. It was the last place Cora had touched before she vanished. She'd hung her shawl there one spring morning and never came back for it. Wyatt had boarded it shut the same week. But Eli wasn't bound by ghosts the same way his father was. He pried loose the rotting door and slipped inside, the air thick with hay, dust, and old sorrow. He climbed over broken rafters, past the toppled milking bench, until something caught the corner of his eye. A glint. Half buried under a collapsed feed sack was a small tin box, the kind his mother used to keep her sewing needles in. He remembered it only because she'd let him play with the buttons inside, pretend they were coins from far-off places. He brushed off the dirt, cracked the lid, and there it was. The locket. Tarnished but whole. Oval-shaped with a floral etching on the front and a hinge so delicate it creaked when he opened it. Inside, a photograph faded by time but unmistakable. A girl, no older than 16, hair braided in the old style, smiling like she hadn't yet learned how much the world could take. Around her neck hung the very necklace the woman now wore, the same pattern, the same worn clasp. It wasn't similar, it was the same. Eli ran, locket clutched tight in his palm, straight back to the house. He burst through the door, nearly tripping over the rug. Wyatt looked up from where he sat, sharpening his knife reflex more than purpose. The woman stirred. "I found it," Eli gasped. "It's her." He held out the locket with both hands like an offering. Wyatt took it slowly. He opened it, his breath hitched. "I gave her this the day before we married," he said, voice rough. "Said it was to hold a picture of us. She never replaced the one of her as a girl." The woman sat up, squinting. "I've seen that face. I dream about her." Wyatt turned toward her. "That's you, that's who you were." She blinked, confusion blooming. "I don't remember." Eli crawled into her lap. "Maybe you don't have to. You came back anyway." Wyatt stared at the locket again, the chain now hanging around the woman's neck. Not planted, not stolen. Taken. Whatever had happened to her out there, whoever had tried to erase her hadn't counted on the boy. Or the locket. Or the land remembering what men tried to bury. This wasn't a trick. It was a life torn away and now clawing back into place. The wind had changed again, sweeping hard from the east, carrying with it the scent of rain that never came. The clouds had thickened in a way that made the daylight feel bruised. Wyatt stood by the corral, watching the sky more than the restless horses. Since the locket had surfaced, silence had settled over the house, like a new roof, sturdy, but temporary, because storms didn't ask for permission. He'd seen it in her eyes that morning, as she buttoned the collar of Eli's old shirt to cover her bruises. The knowledge that something else was coming, something worse than the posse. By noon the distant thrum of hooves on hardpan reached them, too slow for a stampede, too steady for wandering riders. Wyatt shaded his eyes against the glare and saw a single figure crest the ridge. The man rode a black gelding with a military seat, upright as a post. His coat wasn't cowboy leather or sheriff's wool. It was a federal brown duster with a badge stitched to the lapel. Dust rose around him like the train smoke he had likely stepped off hours before. Wyatt felt the muscles in his shoulders tighten. The stranger dismounted in one practiced motion, tying the reins to the porch rail without asking. He was clean-shaven, except for a shadow of stubble, his hair trimmed too neat for the frontier, and he carried a thick leather folder strapped to the saddle horn papers, not a rifle. His eyes swept the property in measured strokes, like he was already counting what could be seized if it came to that. "You Marlowe?" His voice was even, clipped, not unkind but built for command. Wyatt nodded once. "I'm Franklin Ames, investigator for the Union Pacific Security Bureau. I'm here for a woman who doesn't belong to you." From the doorway, Eli peeked out, but Wyatt gave a small shake of his head. The boy disappeared back into the dim of the house. The woman was still inside, though Wyatt could almost feel her pulse from where he stood, as if she sensed the words before they were spoken. "She's not a criminal," Wyatt said flatly. Ames's expression didn't change. He unstrapped the folder, opened it, and showed a document sealed with a federal crest. "She's a witness in a private investigation regarding a derailment outside Dunrock last winter. That accident killed 12 men. Official story says it was an act of God. Truth is," he paused, glanced at the ground. "Truth is the company cut corners. She saw too much. Someone tried to make sure she'd never talk." Wyatt said nothing. Ames lowered the paper. "She wasn't supposed to live through that boxcar trip. Somebody went off script. Her being here puts you and the boy in danger. My orders are to retrieve her quietly before the men who arranged her disappearance find out she's still breathing." Wyatt's grip on the corral rail tightened until the wood creaked. "You offering to save her or bury her all over again?" Ames didn't flinch. "I'm offering you a way to keep your land. The company's already circling to buy up properties along this line. If you surrender her into my custody, I'll see your deeds stay untouched, no liens, no foreclosures. She'll be escorted to a safe house back east. Out of your hair, out of his life." The cost settled heavy in the air, unspoken yet as clear as thunder on the horizon. Give her up and keep the farm. Or refuse, and risk not only losing the ranch but bringing the company's wrath down on every acre, every fence post, every breath they'd fought to keep. Wyatt looked toward the house then, saw through the open window the woman sitting at the table with Eli beside her, their heads bent together over the silver locket, as if trying to stitch memories back into the chain. He saw the bruises darkening her skin, the way she carried herself smaller than she was, and he thought of the deal on the table. Ames followed Wyatt's gaze. "You've got a boy. You know what a future costs." The sky grumbled low, promising rain that hadn't yet learned how to fall. Wyatt didn't answer. Not yet. Some debts needed silence before words could be spoken. By dusk, the sky burned the color of forge coals, and the prairie wind that had only whispered all day began to howl like a trapped thing. Smoke from some distant brush fire drifted low across the fields, staining the air with the bitter smell of char. Wyatt stood on the porch with his rifle across his chest, watching as figures approached from the south, neighbors, townsfolk, men and women he'd known for years, their faces shadowed by brimmed hats and the orange flicker of lanterns. No posse this time, not exactly. More like a gathering pulled forward by equal parts fear and curiosity. Franklin Ames was gone, driven back toward the rail spur with a promise to return, but the damage was done. His talk of corporate secrets had spread like a spark on dry straw. Now everyone wanted a say in what to do about the stranger in Wyatt's house. They didn't come shouting. That was worse somehow. They came in silence, boots grinding gravel, a slow tide that filled the yard, and stopped just shy of the steps. The old church bell had rung to summon them. Proof enough this was no longer a mob but something heavier, a council of judgment. Wyatt didn't call them in, didn't ask them to leave either. He simply said, "If you're here to see her, you'll do it under my roof. Not from the dirt like you're measuring a horse for slaughter." Inside, the woman sat stiff-backed at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller than the room would allow. The locket rested open in her palm, its photo visible to no one but her. Eli hovered near her elbow, silent but steady, the way a boy learns to be when the adults around him are about to break something they can't mend. The townspeople crowded in until the house smelled of wet wool and iron dust, the storm wind pressing at the shutters as if it too wanted in. Someone struck a match and lit a second lantern. Its light caught the locket in the woman's hand, and a murmur ran through the room. Silas Cormack stepped forward first, his hat in his hands now, voice rough but not cruel. "We've ridden hard enough over this land without knowing the whole truth. If that locket's real, show it." Wyatt nodded once. The woman passed it to Silas with a tremor in her fingers. He opened it, stared at the faded photograph, then looked at Wyatt. That her? Wyatt's jaw worked before he found words. That's Cora. Years younger, same chain around her neck. The woman lifted her chin. I don't remember posing for it. I just know it belongs to me. A low murmur rippled again, half disbelief, half awe. It was Eli who stilled them. He stepped forward until he stood between the grown men and the woman in the chair. His small voice carried clearer than the lantern flame. If she's not my mama, why does my heart say she is? No one spoke after that. The question hung in the room like a church hymn unsung. Silas cleared his throat, uneasy. We could fight over what's right, or we can put it to a vote. Who here believes the boy deserves to keep the only mother he's likely to have back? One by one, rough hands went up. Some slowly, some with a kind of defiance against their own doubts. Not all, but enough. Silas handed the locket back to the woman as though it were a verdict. Then it settled. Whatever name she carried before, tonight she stays Cora Marlowe, and nobody takes her without crossing all of us. Wyatt let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The woman closed her fingers around the locket as if it were both proof and promise. The wind outside shifted again, cooler now, carrying the first mist of long-denied rain. Mercy had won, not through law, not through evidence, but by the fragile weight of a child's truth spoken aloud. The first drop struck the porch rail like a small drumbeat, so soft Wyatt almost thought he imagined it. Then another fell on the brim of his hat, darkening the dust-cracked felt, and a third slid off the tip of the lantern hook to vanish into the thirsty soil. The smell of it rose at once, sweet, earthy, electric. Like the land itself was drawing a breath after months of holding it in. All day the sky had worn a bruised copper hue, clouds swollen but stubborn, yet now at last they had broken open. Wyatt stood at the edge of the porch, hat in his hands, watching the dark sheet drift across the pasture. The horses turned their flanks toward the rain and lowered their heads in a kind of surrender. Fence posts glistened wet. The yard that had been dust-blown for half a season began to drink deep. The storm made no thunder at first, only the patient hiss of falling water, and that hush was somehow louder than any gale. Behind him, the door creaked open. She stepped out, wrapped in Eli's old blanket, the fringe already damp from the mist. Her hair clung in dark strands to her face, her feet bare on the porch boards. She didn't speak. She just tilted her chin up to the rain as if it might wash something back into her memories, names, the missing pieces of herself. Nothing came. But the look in her eyes softened all the same. Inside, Eli pressed his nose to the window pane, grinning at the sight of puddles forming where no puddle had been all summer. He ran out barefoot and began tracing circles in the mud with his toes, laughing in a way Wyatt hadn't heard in years. It was the kind of laugh that echoed from before loss had bent his voice lower. A letter had arrived that morning, by courier from Franklin Ames. No seal of the company this time. Just a short note saying the matter had been resolved elsewhere, and that he would not return. Wyatt hadn't asked what strings had been pulled, or who had paid the price. Some questions only dragged more shadows in their wake. The enforcer's absence was explanation enough. Now, as the rain thickened into steady curtains, the woman turned to Wyatt. I don't remember the vows we made, she said quietly. I don't even remember leaving, but I know I was meant to come back here. Wyatt met her eyes, the corners of his mouth tightening not in anger but in something closer to understanding. Maybe remembering isn't the point, he said. Maybe staying is. She nodded, pulling the blanket closer around her shoulders. Eli splashed in the yard and shouted, Look, Papa, the ground's drinking. His laughter carried over the drizzle, and both adults watched as the boy spun under the rain, arms open wide, as if he could catch the whole sky. Wyatt felt something shift in his chest, then not the old ache vanishing, but the weight of it spreading thinner, shared at last. Grief, he realized, was never meant to be locked away like a box in the attic. It was soil, and sometimes it needed the rain to stir what still could grow. He stepped down into the mud beside his son, letting the water soak his boots, and the woman followed a moment later. Together, they stood in the downpour until the chill bit their skin, not speaking, just letting the storm baptize the fractured pieces of their lives. When Eli grew tired and leaned against her hip, the woman stroked his hair and whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes family finds its way back, even if it has to crawl." Wyatt heard her, but said nothing. The rain set enough drumming on tin roof, seeping into cracked furrows, tapping against the locket she still wore at her throat. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote barked once and fell silent. The land was spared that night, the fire risk doused, the cattle watered, the wellspring renewed. The boy slept by the hearth later with wet curls on his forehead. Wyatt watched him, then looked across at the woman drying her hair by the flames, and wondered what name a man should give to a justice that saved no one perfectly, but gave them all a chance to begin again. What would you call justice, punishment for the guilty, or the mercy that lets the broken stay standing?